Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. At Dick's in 2013, Phish famously used the setlist to spell out the phrase, "Most shows spell something." It was a good goof at the time, but it also inspired thousands of fans to take that message literally and inspect the band's song choices at any given show. And sometimes they would craft a motif, a theme, a narrative that might change a listener's perspective, and they would see and hear the show through a completely different lens than usual. Today's guest, Jeffrey Rosenberg, tells us that at least one show spelled something. Jeffrey chose to discuss August 9th, 2024 at the Bethel Woods Center for the Arts. Where most of us would hear a standard great Phish show that night, Jeffrey heard meditations on love, action, addiction, recovery, and more. At times, today's conversation may sound like the podcast version of the Always Sunny in Philadelphia Pepe Silvia meme. But as you listen, I hope you could hang with Jeffrey and I, whether or not you think the theory holds water. But in the end, that's what attendance bias is for. Every fan gets their own story, and every fan's perspective is valid. As you'll hear me say a few times during today's episode, I'm grateful that Jeffrey came on the show to share his perspective, because he was able to talk about songs that I've heard literally hundreds of times, and with a few sentences, provide a new way for me to consider the lyrics. It's stuff like that that makes this podcast such a joy. I hope you feel the same way after today's episode. So let's join Jeffrey to talk about New York tornadoes, Summer 2000, and the Mary Tyler Moore Show as we discussed August 9th, 2024 at Bethel Woods. Jeffrey, welcome to Attendance Bias. How are you today?
Doing great, Brian. Thanks for having me on the show. Excited to talk about the Phish.
I'm always excited to talk about the Phish. And I'm always excited to talk about Phish at Bethel. Today's show, they played a number of times by now, but the show that you picked today, August 9th, 2024, at technically Bethel Woods Center for the Arts, Bethel, New York. Before we get going on anything, I have to ask, is it Bethel or is it Bethel for you?
I'm going to go Bethel. But this was actually my first time attending a show here at Bethel. I did not hear anyone say Bethel. Is that a thing?
It was a thing growing up before the venue itself was built. And when I was in elementary school and middle school, and I was getting into classic rock, and I would go to all the head shops I could find nearby, and all of the Woodstock posters where people would say Bethel Woods or Bethel Woods. And it was used interchangeably, and I didn't know. So I think just over time, it's just normalized to Bethel Woods.
Yeah, when in doubt, I think what would Trey do? So maybe, let's get him on the show, and he can clarify this for everyone.
So today's show, we'll get into it deep, and I'm really excited to talk to you about it because I was not at this show, and I remember kind of following from afar. And I love that venue. I was only there in 2011 for the first time that they played it. And I remember walking out thinking, this is like the greatest addition to outdoor music in New York State. You told me that this was your first time there in 2024. So I'm interested to hear my memories from 13 years prior to what you think in a fairly recent time of visiting, at least when we're recording this. But before we hear about any of that, Jeffrey, let's hear about you as a fan with the Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
So, Jeffrey, when was your first Phish show, and what do you remember from it?
First Phish show was 7/10/99, Camden, the famous Camden Chalk Dust. I was, I believe, a junior in high school. I don't have a ton of memories from the show. I didn't really fully get Phish. And I think it's always kind of an evolution with the band as you go and see them more and more. I think what's interesting about them is you continue to kind of learn things over the years, and my perspective on what's going on between the band and audience and what Phish is trying to accomplish on stage has certainly changed, and we'll definitely jump into that during this show. I remember my babysitter taking me and my buddy, and the first thing we wanted to do when we got in the car to drive to the show. And I grew up in suburban Philly. Was we wanted to smoke weed, and my babysitter was like, "We're gonna have plenty of time to do that. Like, don't worry." So I remember that and feeling kind of silly once we got to the venue, realizing like this was an open drug forum. The other thing I remember was I believe they closed the show with Tweezer Reprise, and there was this heavy set Phish head, very much ahead, standing behind me. And when Tweezer Reprise started, he started screaming at the top of his lungs that this is the best song in the world. So that's sort of the bookend memories of that trip and that first show. I've been going back ever since. I don't keep track of how many shows that I've been to, but it's certainly over 100 at this point.
But you never forget your first.
You never forget your first. You don't. But I would say the first show that I really got it and fell in love with this band was the following summer, 6/28/2000, the Homedale show.
Sure.
That bathtub gin absolutely blew my mind. And I remember thinking I was dancing as fast as I ever could at that point, almost having to stop myself to take a moment to realize like what was going on at that point in time. And an incredible show. And they sucked me in early, Brian, and they reeled me in, and I've been going ever since.
Yeah, me too. I'm curious about your experience between your first show and then the one at Homedale, just about a year later, almost exactly. You said that at your first show, you weren't as hip to the scene, but you didn't really know exactly what was going on. Were you fully bought in by the time you came back around to Homedale? Did you see shows in between, or was it, because I waited a year between my first and second show.
I went into that first show liking Phish. I was really into Gordon. I loved Weekapaw Groove, and I loved Down with Disease, and his playing on both those songs is fantastic. I hadn't really picked up on the rest of the band, and wasn't entirely into like improvisational music at that moment. I mean, I think there's, I don't think it's a coincidence that after that first show, and that was sort of the first time I was dabbling with marijuana and smoking weed a bit. And I think is once that was introduced to my world, along with Phish, the rest is history. But then I saw them, I went to the Spectrum, I think it was 12/11/99.
Yeah, that's a classic show.
Another fantastic show, Harry Hood opener, incredible Down with Disease, one of the most sublime Ghosts I've ever seen. That was another one that definitely reeled me in. And then a few buddies and myself, we did a 7-show run in 2000 that summer. So we did Raleigh, which I think was 6/25/2000, all the way up to the Camden shows at 7/4. And I think the Phish Companion or Phish.net considers that run of 6/28 to 7/4 like some of the best shows they've ever done, and they were absolutely transcendent shows, and another reason I'm still seeing this band to this day. But as Phish evolves, they tend to get better. They are certainly not a nostalgia act, and are continue to bring the heat.
Well, speaking of 40 years, and then speaking of 24 years from 2000, what was your most recent Phish show, and what did you think of it?
So my most recent show was Mondegreen, a week after the Bethel show. So I went to Mondegreen, I guess that was Saturday night. Mm-hmm. My new thing is I'm a big fan of kind of dropping in and out of the Phish scene. So I did Friday night at Bethel. I was considering going another night, but Friday night was so fucking good. It was like, I don't need to see this band again. I mean, there's points at shows. I remember the Halloween run where they dropped that Mercury, and I was
unbelievable.
I was like, I can leave the show right now. Like, I don't need to stay. This is that good. So I did end up going to Saturday Mondegreen. I thought it was a solid, very solid, good show.
Since today's show that we're going to discuss took place at Bethel Woods, famously, not quite exactly the site of the Woodstock Festival, but that's basically how it is marketed. Looking at the poster for Woodstock or the lineup for Woodstock, and you have a time machine, you could go back to 1969 and see just one artist off of that poster. Who would you see?
Yeah, without question, Jimi Hendrix revolutionized the rock guitar. Without question, that's who I'm seeing.
Completely in a vacuum, all else being equal, of a 3-night stand since this Bethel Woods run was a 3-night stand, which is the best night to see anywhere? Night 1, night 2, or night 3? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't get caught up in this stuff typically. I think it's always funny with the like, oh, don't miss a Sunday show, brah. First off, I'm usually too tired by the third night to really be into it. As I was saying earlier, I think my new vibe with seeing Phish is to kind of drop in and drop out. I used to say you need to see Phish twice, especially in terms of like taking somebody that's never seen him before. And my thing was always, if you go once and you love it, you're going to want to go again. And if you go once and you don't like it, you kind of need to go again to make sure you don't like it.
I agree. Try anything twice, right?
And so I think with that said, night 2 is the move.
So I asked this question for everybody who's ever on attendance bias. What is the weirdest thing you've ever seen at a Phish show?
I don't know about the weirdest, but I will say during this show, I had one of the most secondhand cringe moments I've ever had. So why don't we save that and we can come back to that during the show breakdown.
All right, fair enough.
When was this show played?
So taking a look at this show, August 9th, 2024 at Bethel Woods Center for the Performing Arts. This is legitimately the third consecutive episode that I'm recording where a guest has chosen a show from the summer of 2024. It's the fourth one, if you include a Mondegreen recap that I did with my buddies over at the Stub Me Down podcast. So by now, I've already talked about the summer of 2024, and I loved it. I thought it was good. I think it's probably the best Phish year overall at this point since 2017. And I could summarize it in 4 quick reasons, but for the most part, I want to hear your take on 2024.
So I play a lot of poker. It's a bit of a hobby of mine. And we're always mindful of having a capped range versus an uncapped range. And if you have a capped range, that means you don't have the ability to possess the best hands in a particular situation. So you're sort of limited or capped in terms of what you can do. When you have an uncapped range, it means you have the ability to possess all the best hands in a particular situation and allows you sort of unlimited opportunity to bet and do all the things related to poker. Phish right now has an uncapped range. They are limitless in what they can do, especially from a jamming perspective. And listen, to your point, you think it's the best run since 2017. I mean, I think you look back since 3.0, you have summer 2012, fall 13, summer 15, summer 17, probably fall 18, arguably 2021. And then you have this year. I think it's been a really special year for all the things you mentioned as well. I think, the band's been doing a lot of self-promotion, more than we've ever seen before, which I think is great. And, the thing that I've been thinking about a lot recently, this band's been together for 40 plus years. They've been playing consistently for most of that time. Obviously, we've taken a few breaks. We know about the all-night jam sessions they were doing for years, all the amount of practice they've been doing. I mean, when you take a step back and think about it, I don't think there's 4 humans on this planet that has played as much music together as these 4 individuals. And that alone, I don't know if that makes them the tightest band in the world, but it certainly makes them the most connected band. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I was thinking, well, first of all, it is a bit of blowing my mind a little bit just to think about it on that, not quite cosmic scale, but long-term scale, right? Like a century-long scale of 40 years. And I know Page is maybe like 37 of those 40 years, but we're not going to quibble on that. But just the idea that these 4 guys, the way you phrased it, that they are probably on the planet, the group of people who have been playing music the most amount of time for the longest. I was thinking the word familiar. It's not just that they're tight, and I know you dismissed that word in a sense, but it's kind of like when you pick up or when Trey picks up a guitar and Fishman sits down to the drum kit. I bet you could blindfold both of them and the music would be just as tight and just as relaxed as it would be if they didn't have any blindfolds on. And the same could be true for any juxtaposition of any four of the members. They must know each other so well. People always say about whether it's spouses or long term partners, I know you the best of anyone, or I know you better than you know yourself. I have a feeling that these four guys know each other as well or better than any four humans on the planet might know about one another. Forget about playing music because your personality is expressed through how you play and interact, right? Improvisation is another form of conversation. So
100%.
to hear you phrase it that way, just kind of had me look at it at a different way. And it just makes me appreciate what we're hearing. And it makes the show that we're about to discuss and some of the improvisation that went on during it kind of clicks a little bit into more sense because any other band, you would think this sounds like garbage at some points. But when you have the context, which I've found with a lot of great art, when you know what went on before you reached this point of the art, it makes you appreciate it and it helps you understand why what's happening is happening. And it makes me, I can't speak for others, but it makes me love it and appreciate it even more, whether or not I even like it. There are parts that they play that I
Sure.
don't really like. I wouldn't choose to flip on certain parts, and we'll get there again. But the fact that you just brought that little nugget of information or perspective, I should say, helps me appreciate this show and again the summer of 2024 even more than I did previously, which was not a little bit, it was a lot.
Yeah, there are several moments in this show that are not for the faint of heart. And if I was someone asked me that had never heard Phish before, what should you play me, or what would you play for me, or play me something? I'd probably play them Free or maybe Down with Disease. The one thing I can tell you, there are certain segments of this show that I would definitely not play them.
Yeah. Why do you have attendance bias toward this show? Although I think we've gotten a pretty good sense of why you're so connected. But of all the shows you could have picked, other than 628 2000, why this one?
Yeah, I think it's important to talk about the Phish experience at a macro level, first and foremost. This band is all about contextual relevance. It's all about setting and scene, or when and where they're playing, and what's topical at that moment in time, whether it's with respect to the band and maybe it's a particular anniversary, or what's going on in the music scene. And in some cases, like what is topical in the world at large, right? They do this to varying degrees of overtness and, I would argue like cryptic type of things that you really need to sort of unearth and decode. I'm going to give you a few examples, right?
Sure.
So Baker's Dozen, they give out donuts each night. The flavor of the donut takes on the motif or theme of that particular evening. You're there, everybody kind of understands what's going on. Recently, Phil Lesh passes away. That night, Phish goes out and opens with Box of Rain. Pretty obvious kind of stuff, right? Clearly a wink and a nod or a tribute or homage, which is, what Phish is all about to Phil in this case. A little bit more nuanced here. They do play Dirt a few songs later. And I think that also was a tribute and a wink and a nod to Phil. And then I think when you look at that song and listen to that song through the lens of Phil's passing, the song itself sort of shapeshifts and takes on a whole new meaning, right? I'll give you another example. Mexico 2019. They're playing down at the beach. We know we're going to get sand and the song I Heard the Ocean Sing. It's arguably almost like kind of kitschy when they do that. And I think, for folks that kind of hate on the band, that's like an easy low-hanging fruit to kind of point out. But also at that show, it's the winter of 2019. It's the first time that they're playing Mexico since Trump's been in office. Everyone's talking about What are they going to play the first night? And my prediction at that time was I didn't know what they were going to play, but I did know that they were going to do something that alluded to the wall, alluded to immigration, the border, all the things that were going on in the political sphere with respect to Mexico and the United States. And what did they come out and do in the first set? We get Rise Come Together with the lyrics, and the people of the world all love the same way. We're going to break down the walls one day. From high above, we're all the same down here. Without a map, the lines all disappear. We're so tired of our senseless fight. The thing we can all do, right, is come together, come together. So for those that don't think Phish is political in their music, that's just a prime example. And I think, a much bigger wink and a nod that they know what's going on in contemporary America. And, something that I think a lot of Phish fans are, somewhat unwittingly aware of. I know you had our friend James Dell on not too long ago, and him and I kind of speak that same language. And he was actually, we attended this show together. So some of the things we talked about, he's actually, not to speak on his behalf, but he kind of co-signed a lot of what we're going to talk about here.
Oh yeah, James and I have had quite a number of set break conversations where he sees a lot in everything. And I'm a little bit more, I don't mean conservative, certainly not politically, but I'm a little bit more practical is the word I'm looking for. So I want to listen and I want to agree. I just don't know. I'm more kind of agnostic about it. So I'm interested at the same time to hear what people hear. So are you suggesting that the show we're about to go over, this Bethel show, had like kind of messages or at least a coherent theme?
There is an amalgamation of multiple things going on here, from overt to, I think, quite cryptic. Before we even jump into that, I think we need to set the context for this particular show, right? You already touched on it. So let's set the context for this particular night's show. So we're in upstate New York, and as you've already mentioned, essentially on the same grounds where Woodstock was held. We're not terribly far from where Trey was arrested, changing the course and trajectory of his life, where he found sobriety and has been sober ever since. I think he said many times that's the best thing that's ever happened to him.
Yeah, the police officer saved his life.
And that particular day, we had a massive storm roll through Bethel in upstate New York. So much so that I was coming from Brooklyn, driving up with our friend Chase, and I was close to bailing on this show. We were supposed to stay about an hour north of the venue. That was obviously not going to happen. We ended up finding somewhere local to stay and ended up deciding to go to the show. But all this to say that, like, anybody that was going to this concert, they were making a trek in some difficult conditions just to get up there. That's kind of laying the setting and scene, if you will, for this concert.
Set 1.
And they opened the first set to welcome everybody, the first set of the first show of 3, with First Tube, which is always a strong opener, and it's always a strong closer to get everyone revved up to start a 3-night run at what's become a fan favorite venue. People used to clamor for Phish to come back to Bethel Woods. It definitely hits different as an opener. And I had the thought listening that by around 3 minutes, when everything starts really rising up and, like everything's pushed forward, that this would be the peak energy level of most concerts that you would see. Meanwhile, we're about 3 or 4 minutes into this first show, into this 3-night run. They always say, don't start with your most energetic tune because you have nowhere to go. But they kind of throw that off. They are the exception to the rule, because there are crazy licks and drum fills at the 5-minute mark during what's normally a straightforward 3.5-minute song. So the crowd must have been going absolutely bananas before they drop into no man's land.
1 minute and 25 seconds into this song, Brian, we get a Soul Sacrifice tease. Clearly a Woodstock wink and a nod to start this show. the energy was palpable. It's interesting. I think this song is usually, like as you said, it's reserved for. It's become a second set closer and an encore in many cases. So to come out with this song, I think they were also saying something else, which we'll get into a bit here. But really nice outro jam. I think First Tube over the last couple of years has sort of morphed into more of a Down with Disease type jam.
Yes.
And this is a great version. Trey really goes for it, and you can kind of tell they're not messing around tonight.
I agree. It's very apparent right from the beginning. And when they drop into No Man in No Man's Land, I always think this is an excellent two-spot song. It's great to follow up whatever you open with, kind of like Get Back on the Train, or sometimes Bathtub Gin. His vocals, Trey's vocals, that is, sound especially energetic. And they pretty much just lay a bed, like the band does, lay kind of like a rhythm bed, while Trey kind of soars over the top with Page filling out the middle, and he stays on piano, which I always love. It settles down into a bliss groove, which is typical for this tour, around 7.5 minutes. And I had a vision while I was listening on my couch, by the way, that the sun is still up because it's summer. And I can imagine my vision was from the lawn. And it's probably the best manicured lawn of any venue that Phish plays, outdoor venue. And I could just picture everyone looking around and smiling, just easing into this show while simultaneously being energized to be in this very small town, which is also a very fun aspect of seeing Phish on summer tour, when an entire population of fans of this band kind of invade and take over a region of a state. It's always so much fun. So I just had a vision at about 7.5 minutes to about 9.5 minutes that it's just, we're all here, we're settled in, bring it on. And then they just tear it apart by the end. But by 12 minutes, I'm just already sunk in. They've gripped me.
7:30-minute mark, you get that key modulation.
Yes.
And Trey drops this lullaby-like melody, which really becomes the foundation and motif for the majority of this jam moving forward, and only really just increases in ferocity over the next subsequent 5 or 6 minutes. In my notes here, I have "Eat Your Heart Out," Jimmy Page, which starts in around the 12-15 minute mark. What's incredible about this jam is, like, one, relatively speaking, at an average show, everybody would be talking about this No Man's. And I think in the pantheon of jams with respect to this particular concert, it's right there at the top. The thing about this tour and this jam in particular, it's incredibly dynamic throughout. There's not a ton of lulls here. And then again, he finds this lullaby-like melody, which we'll come back to maybe a bit later in the pod, that's very infectious. And then, around the 10:30 mark, he starts doing a variation off of that melody. And then we get into full-blown Eat Your Heart Out, Jimmy Page vibes. And yeah, we are going with a big jam in the second song slot here, Brian. What is that typically reserved for? You got a first tube opener, big type 2 jam, second song slot.
It kind of portends what my wife and I call special shows with capital S's, like designated as a special show. But we're still at the beginning, and they follow up No Man in No Man's Land with Cavern, which is what I think it's supposed to be, like a follow up, almost a low key follow up to a first set rock jam. And I always like Cavern. I'll sing along, but I also might go to the bathroom or get a beer for those 4 to 6 minutes.
I think the most interesting part of this Cavern is the first verse. So your time is near, the mission's clear. It's later than you think. Trey is audibly laughing when he says it's later than you think, implicitly saying you're getting a second set in the first set. And I know you're a teacher, and during this Cavern and subsequent song, and no disrespect to anybody with a learning disability, but the term dyslexic set is kind of what we were talking about. Everything felt jumbled up and out of order here, and in essence, again, we were getting a second set in the first set.
And then there's no doubt, because my friend, which is the song of the summer, we know
100%.
retrospectively.
100%.
I my first thought while listening was, is it unfair to have high expectations for this song, for my friend, knowing retrospectively that 2024 has been an amazing year for it? And I could see that it's nearly 20 minutes. I have the luxury of listening to it from the future, whereas you're listening to it in real time at the show. I get more excited to hear my friend than any other song when I but when I'm listening to a show from 2024. Like, normally I would expect it to end around 6 or 8 minutes, and Trey starts shouting like, my friend, he's got a knife. He just screams it, begins soloing, and then all of a sudden we're in this weird fuego jam at 7.5 minutes.
Yeah.
And then, my term for it was son of jam filled.
Yeah, for them to take a classic Phish song and turn it into a jam vehicle, I mean, they've taken this song to an entirely new level. And I was at the Baker's Dozen Jam show. I was actually at every Baker's Dozen show.
Mazel tov.
Yeah, talk about it's a marathon, not a sprint, Brian. That show was incredible. That was one of my favorite nights, the jam night, and to see this song become part of a new jam vehicle for them is really special, because the song on its own is one of their best.
Yeah.
So it's great to see what they've done with it. One other thing to note before we jump into the jam here, because this jam is certainly not for the faint of heart. We get the lyrics, the clever ruse, and I can't help but think that's just another reference to this first set being a second set.
Maybe. I don't know. I guess because I think of a ruse like a trick you play on someone, right? Like
That's
bamboozling them.
This is a trick. That's the trick. We're coming out. We appreciate you all coming out here in the rain. I think there was some tornadoes, and you're gonna get a special show tonight. And that's the clever ruse. You're getting the second set and the first set.
I love it. And I don't know if this is the case. Maybe I don't know how closely you followed the tour because of your, you dip in, you dip out. But after this, my friend became, all right, everyone stop. This is like can't miss at bats. This is like Aaron
Yeah.
Judge hitting the 62nd home run or whatever when a couple years ago when everything in New York would stop and everyone had to find a TV. That's kind of what it felt like for the rest of 2024 after this version of my friend, because they built this great backbone of a jam as opposed to just noodling. They keep it going. And Trey is playing great rhythm at about 10 and a half minutes. And Paige comes in with synthesizers. And to me, when Trey starts playing rhythm, that's a sign of great success because that's showing his trust in the other three band members that someone will take the lead and drive the energy to capture the audience's attention. I know that that's implicit, that they all trust each other and like their years beyond that. But when Trey plays rhythm, it might even be a subconscious version of him saying, I don't need to be the guy right now. And I loved it. At 12 minutes, I wrote, this is it. Like it wouldn't be too out of place in the mid 90s.
Yeah, this to me is Phish does psychedelic jazz.
Yes, good. Well said.
Yeah, Trey starts comping, letting the rest of the band come in, and we're on like full band interplay here. And God bless John Fishman. Like listening to this, like my arms are tired. I feel like John Fishman could be a personal trainer the way he's working those drums sometimes. But yeah, this is really interesting interplay. They finally modulate keys around 15 minutes, and we hit what I like to call psychedelic cowboy. As the jam gets quite twangy, and I think it's interesting to note here because they'll go from like a deep minor jam and they'll sort of modulate to a major key, and that's when you kind of go, okay, we're going to get that Allman Brothers motif,
Yeah.
and it's kind of a way for them to reset, find themselves, go big, and close it out. What's great about this is they find this really interesting place and kind of a happy major chord. They don't Phish doesn't take the bait. Like Trey, they lay down this really cool bouncy groove. It's like such a juxtaposition from where they just were. We get this cool little start and stop, and when it ends, even Trey says, what the hell was that? I got a group after that one. That was weird. We're going to be here for 3 days. Why not? He even was acknowledging that like what they just did was way out there.
And we're going to be here for 3 days. Why not? Is the most energized that I could be as an audience member, to be like, all right, we're all on the same page. We have nowhere to go. I think he said that at I don't know if it was it or it might have even been as early as the Clifford Ball, where he's like, no one's got anywhere to go, right? It's like we're here, we'll just go for it. Go for everything. And
Yeah,
they
this
do.
doesn't suck. This doesn't suck. I think he said maybe that was a Mexico run in the first day.
Yeah.
Something along those lines. But yeah, this right here, the second half of this jam, the type 2 piece. I mean, I guess the whole jam's kind of a type 2 at this point. But they use sort of the Fuego theme, as the foundation to lift off into type 2, right? This is a prime example of uncapped range right here. They are limitless in what they can do. And this is definitely, the psychedelic jazz portion of this jam. I'm not playing for a newbie. I'm not playing this for anybody that's never heard Phish before. But the fact that they could get from where they are there and turn this into this super interesting melodic jam that, like, frankly, almost sort of sounds composed, just speaks to where they're at as a band right now.
Yeah, that's one of the things when I said about what I loved about the summer 2024 is that they could nail the changes, that they can flow together as a group. And that's definitely here at the end of the jam, where I don't know where this comes from, but the little riff that Trey plays, like do 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 do, and they miss it the first time. It was almost like a false ending, but then they come back and do it the right time before slipping into Bug, which I see as the same kind of role as Cavern a little bit earlier in the set, that it's like a mellow regroup ballad. But even this one is a little extra fun because there's Norwegian wood teases all over the place and it fits right in.
Yeah, and this was the song that was the commencement of where I thought this show was starting to take on a deeper meaning. So a few things here. We get our first storm reference with the rain, wind on the runway. Then we get a concepts I'll ponder and concepts I won't ever see. God is it one of these, former or latter? Trey poses the question, which did you think I meant? And then we have the chorus, Bug, don't need it, don't feed it. My thoughts faded, overrated. And it occurred to me at this time, especially like being upstate, where obviously we talked about where Trey was arrested. This sort of felt to me like perhaps he was alluding to his drug abuse. And almost as if it doesn't matter, I'm okay now. Subsequently as well, I thought it was really interesting, almost as if the band was having a conversation with the audience, because they do the Norwegian wood tease and then they go right back into the closing chorus here with It Doesn't Matter. And it was almost as if, like, because everybody, Chase, who was next to me, everybody looked at each other and was like, Norwegian wood tease. And it was almost as if Phish was saying, like, we know that we just did a Norwegian wood tease, but we're in an uncapped range here and we can do whatever we want. It doesn't matter.
Which is where one could argue that that's what they do whenever they're at a peak.
For sure. And so, as far as some of the deeper meanings go, it just, for a second, I was like, okay, that felt like it was taking on a new meaning given the context of this show.
Well, after Bug, they played Julius, which is a great pick-me-up after Bug, which is kind of a more pensive, slower song. And I thought originally that this would be a little bit more traditional than My Friend, for example. Unfair to expect a huge jam in every wrote song. But I'm still in that headspace. Like, that's what My Friend did to me, that every song that comes after is the potential for an exploratory 20-minute type 2. But as I listened to Julius, there's nothing to me about this particular version that stood out But I will say, to its credit, by the time it gets back to the coda and they're really rocking out, I kind of forgot about my friend, and I was looking forward to the rest of the set. So Julius is a good, for me at least, breaking point. For my friend robbed all the attention or sucked the air out of the room in a good way. And then Julius was the breaking point, and then we have the rest of the set to go.
Yeah, and this song is also like the closest thing Phish does to playing gospel music, I would say. So to have this in tandem with Bug, I found quite interesting. You do also have the lyrics, "Is that what the prophet told me he saw?"
Right.
So we're now in sort of back-to-back songs with religious-like references. We also have "He gave it to me, but I really don't want it. I came out on top by the luck of the draw. I think that I know what I haven't known yet, because a week is a month and an hour a day. When you're reaching just pushes it further away. Am I at that moment? Don't take another step. Don't blame it on yourself. Your past and your future are precisely divided. Am I at that moment?" And again, to me, on the backs of having some of these thoughts after hearing Bug, this starts to feel very therapeutic, if you will, almost as if Trey's kind of having a conversation and working his stuff out. I think one of the things that's super important if you're in therapy or dealing with addiction, and I full disclosure, I don't drink anymore. I stopped drinking several years ago and decided to take a break and just kept going. And I certainly have never been at the depths of what Trey was at or anything, but I certainly know, doing a lot of work on myself, one of the most important things is to forgive yourself and not be too hard on yourself. So, this song, again, is starting to set this vibe of, kind of working some of your shit out.
Yeah.
And I don't know what you think about this, but, it is interesting to have the leader of this band, been sober for, what is it, 17, 20 years at this point, close to
Yeah, since
something along those
2006.
lines.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, coming up on 20 years. And, it's kind of interesting that, where he is in his life is in many cases a juxtaposition to where a lot of Phish fans are at, from a drug abuse perspective. And I do find that dynamic very fascinating. I think like the Mark Maron podcast where he interviewed Trey, I think was quite fascinating. And I think the most interesting part of that was, Maron talking about the darkness that, a lot of these, the hippie culture can sort of be shrouded in. And, that certainly resonated with me, having attended a lot of Phish shows and been to a lot of, post-show after parties and a lot of debauchery going on. And, I just think it's a very interesting sort of dynamic, like I said, between, where Trey is at and where, I think there is a good portion of the fan base that is still struggling with that. And whether Trey's trying to preach to the fan base, tacitly in the only way Phish can, in this sort of cryptic manner. But, listening to this Julius, I felt like I needed to pick up the phone and call my therapist and find a couch to lay on for a second.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I almost never listened to Julius other than through the lens of what I understand how it was written, as the story of the assassination of Julius Caesar, written through the character, the titular character's point of view. I never thought of it of more than that, but this conversation and your recitation of the lyrics helps me see it again from a different perspective. So I'm glad we're having this conversation. Although, like I said, I can't really speak to that because I've always kept pretty conservative when it comes to partying. I'll stay up late, or I used to stay up late and go to after shows, but I never got too involved when things got too dark. So I didn't surround myself with a lot of people in that sense. But
good for you. Love that. I love that for you.
well, I mean, I am a teacher. I am the man. I work for the state. So, but I will say, some teachers that you probably had in your life, you wouldn't believe what they did when the weekend came around.
Yeah, I think my babysitter, the aforementioned babysitter that took me to my first Phish show, I think she's a teacher. So,
We're everywhere. But
Yeah.
after Julius, they go into a standalone 2001, which I thought for two things. Number one, it's weird that it's standalone, and it's also, to your point about the second set going first, it's a first set 2001, which is extremely weird, set list wise. I don't know if I have the fortitude to look at a fact check to go through all the stats, but I can't imagine it's been done more than a handful of times since 1993 when it used to be like a 3 minute just set opener. But
Sure.
musically speaking, Mike's bass line during the opening almost sounds like sand. It's not really locked in. And I mean that in a good way. It's like they're just developing this 2001. Paige and Trey are playing off each other like about halfway through, like a very groovy call and response. And to your point, one of my notes, I said, I can't believe this is still the first set.
Yeah, I think like if you haven't picked up on this clever ruse, Phish is kind of banging you over the head with this one,
Yeah.
indicating it's a second set, first set. Yeah, it starts off a little slow, a little awkward, and I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of the interplay between Paige and Trey, and I think it's interesting. Like very often, Paige is the melody man that's actually conceiving these patterns and motifs that they pick up on sort of under the radar, and Trey is the one that it meant very often is picking up what Paige is laying down, and then usually takes that melody and in many cases takes the lead with it from there. But very underrated Paige playing, and we're in the first set here. We're getting a 2001. All is right in the world. I will say I think 2001 has maybe lost like a little bit of its sheen. Any big show, like you're going to get a 2001 now. So oddly, I was pumped to hear it, especially in the first set. But I oddly find that this song now, it almost feels like if they pulled it back a bit in terms of how often they play it,
It
it
could
may
take
just be a
on a
bit.
bigger aura in a sense.
Yeah. That's I think a good way to put it.
And after 2001 is Taste, which is a really nice palate cleanser, whereas 2001 is just flip a switch and all of a sudden you're in a 70s funk dance groove. Now with Taste, you're in this kind of cool Latin groove. I keep using the word groove, but like back and forth Latin rock, maybe Santana inspired amalgamation of like three different songs that eventually found their way together in 1998. And
Yeah.
there's this beautiful piano solo which clears the way for Page's guitar. Overall, I thought it was a typical but cohesive and energetic version.
Yeah. I mean, I think Taste, very reminiscent of Stash.
Yeah.
I think those songs kind of go hand in hand, especially the outro jam. If Julius is Phish doing gospel music, Taste is Phish in a situationship. I think if you, as the kids say, I think if you
Yeah.
take if you look at the lyrics, maybe from their original intent, perhaps, but I think the lyrics of this song are very smart and interesting. And I think the thing that stood out to me, continuing with this working hypothesis, the lyrics, because I can see through the lines, which is the chorus to this song and is repeated over and over again and can obviously be easily construed as a drug reference. And in this case,
Right. All I want is a taste for free. Yeah.
All I want is a taste for free. Why I have stayed into things I could be, or if I could see into the fog that surrounds and pins me to the ground. Certainly could be talking about what obviously drugs and abuse can do to you. Being able to see through the lines is I think another example of potential growth and moving past this. And then, as you said, from a jamming perspective, I think this is a short but sweet version. Trey has that, incredible, it's sort of a composed riff that he plays, in really good taste versions. And he repeats that over and over again. And mid to late 90s tastes are the best because they go to that full blown peak where he does that really cool trill and they kind of stick the landing. And I don't know if they've even tried that since 2.0. This version at 7+ minutes is quite solid.
It is. And it leads us straight to character 0, which is obviously the set closer. And when I say obviously, if you listen through this entire set, you need a break. You need a set break. Like, this is a monster set, and fit in with all the other stuff. We talk about context a lot in this conversation. Character 0, I mean, this is bread and butter, set closer stuff. There's lots of Orange Whip samples from Phish, from the Blues Brothers. And I like especially that they're not rushing it, that Fishman and Trey are kind of holding back, but not in a negative way, meaning that they're being patient. And Fishman, I noticed, keeps the hi-hat closed, which he doesn't always do. And it kind of has a studio feel to me. And then right before, I think it's the big guitar solo pops up at 5 minutes, there's a hell of a bass bomb that just ripples through the entire venue. And my first thought listening to this on my couch was, these tapers know what they're doing.
Yeah, this was, I think you nailed it. This was a very solid, rambunctious version of Character 0. I think from a lyrics perspective, we have then I learned just yesterday to rush and never waste the day. Now I'm convinced the whole day long that all I learned was always wrong. Again, potentially referential to Trey kind of learning from his mistakes and moving forward here.
Hi, everybody. Brian here to welcome you to the set break of today's episode of Attendance Bias. First, thank you for listening. And second, just a quick reminder to tell you that even though Attendance Bias comes to you for free, it does take a lot of work and it does take quite a bit of money to keep the lights on here at production. So I just wanted to ask a small favor, if you could support the podcast in any number of the following ways. If you could leave a review or a rating of it on whichever podcast app you use. If you could spread the word, telling a friend or someone you think may be interested in it about it. Or probably the most concrete way is to go to www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias and donate however much you can financially to help with the continuing costs of Attendance Bias. So thank you again so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the second half of today's episode.
Set 2.
Set 2 begins with The Wedge, which is always a good opener. And while it's a typical version, I do like that the flair, like I've been watching Office Space lately, so Trey adds his little pieces of guitar flair that he adds at around 5 minutes as the song gets close to an end. But again, it's just kind of an introduction. The lights go down. Oh, hi, we're back. We have a lot more music to play.
Can never be upset with the Wedge. It's one of my old school favorite songs. Take the Highway Through the Great Divide. Certainly a reference to folks driving up to the show during this storm, potentially the Great Divide in your life, because we've come so very far in at least as many years. Also, a kind of interesting allusion when you look at it in the context of this show. Or maybe just they knew they were going to play Tweezer and they wanted to play a short first song. And the business manager was like, hey, like do the short one and then start the Tweezer riff. And then all the heads are going to be like, oh, we got to buy the stream. We got to buy it. So it could just be that too. I don't know.
That's generally that's how I took it. But I also like your first impression a lot more. That the Wedge is such a wide open, it's such a simple lyrical song in terms of repetition, but it's wide open to interpretation. But before we spend too much time on the Wedge, this Tweezer boy, I listened to this several times since you suggested the show, including on my drive home today. And to me, this is the stuff. Like you mentioned earlier that there were some parts that you wouldn't play for like a person first listening to Phish. Between this Tweezer and its segues into Pillow Jets of Sound, this is graduate level Phish. To me, this is the alternate timeline that if Phish was able to keep their sound consistent but not break up for 2.0, I think this is what 2.0 would have sounded like if all four members were coherent for the entire time.
I kind of had the opposite of attendance bias with this one in terms of not loving it. And I guess real quick to go back into the weirdest, or in this case, kind of the most secondhand embarrassing thing I've experienced at a Phish show. The Tweezer started and we were sitting in between Trey and Paige, a couple sections up, and I decided I wanted to go run and dance freely, sort of in between the walkway behind the soundboard to get a good look at the lights for this one. And so I go over there and there's a walkway and you have the last section behind us. And if you're leaning sort of with your back against the wall, somebody could, drop something on you, you could reach up and touch them. And so I make my way over there, super pumped. There's tons of people over there dancing. Security was letting everybody just kind of let loose. And I end up sitting next to this black guy who, one thing Phish fans are, maybe not the best at, to say the least, is lacking a little bit of style. And
yeah, you could say that.
Yeah, and this guy's, his drip was on point, as the kids like to say. So him and I were kind of standing next to each other. He's got this cool afro. Everyone's vibing out. And all of a sudden I look over and there's this unhinged woman from the front row leaning over several people to grab this guy. She's whispering something into his ear and at the same time grabbing his hair. And I don't think I need to hairsplain to anybody here that you probably shouldn't be touching anybody's hair.
Of course.
You don't know, let alone somebody from the African-American community. It's just kind of taboo and a faux pas. I was kind of mortified witnessing this. And to the guy's credit, he seemed to take it pretty well. And I think in a sense, this woman was maybe trying to compliment him, is kind of what I inferred, but like just completely unhinged and clearly, I would guess, maybe not spending enough time with a diverse set of people to understand some of these social norms. Perhaps just the druggy poos that she was on.
That's where my head was. Yeah.
Yeah. So that transpired. I was close, actually. I was going to almost like on behalf of all Phish fans apologize to this guy. But I said, I figured maybe just let it go and not turn it into a bigger thing than it needs to be. But, I think it's just a shame because I think one of my biggest issues, I think, with the Phish community is just the homogenous nature of the crowd. It's extremely white. It's very male centric. And, I don't know, again, if this guy was a Phish fan or not, if it was certainly his first time. I would have to imagine this might be the anecdote that he's talking about, is some unhinged woman coming up and grabbing him. It's tough. I'd like to see the Phish community. I'm sure the band would, to see a bit more of a diverse community. And, when you see something like that happen, it's just difficult to take and accept. And needless to say, I was kind of out of the vibe at that point during this jam. And, I don't know if you have any thoughts on the crowd and everything in general, with like it being a bit homogenous, but that was disappointing.
Well, yeah, I don't really need to say much more, because I agree with everything you said. You were very articulate in explaining kind of this, you look around and everyone looks like you, or it's become this kind of joke where I'll text a friend where we're going to meet on lot, and I'll say, I'll be the guy, I'll be the white guy in a t-shirt and cargo shorts with Tivas.
Right.
Keep an eye out for me. It's a joke, but it is sad in terms of being a shame, in a way where it's like, I wish we were more diverse. It would lead to a better community, I think, better in almost every way, and a more understanding one. And as far as that particular situation goes, we learned it in kindergartens. Keep your hands to yourself. And I understand, I've been around tons of people who have been on all sorts of drugs. I know it feels good to touch fluffy things or soft things or whatever it is that you see. You want to have tactile sensations with it. It's not the time. It's not the place. And I agree with you. It's everything you're saying. And it is embarrassing. I'm now having third-hand cringe from it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a shame, because I've obviously listened to this tweezer several times over, and it's absolutely incredible. The start of this jam, to me, it sounds like if summer 98 and fall 2013 hooked up, the first 2 minutes of this jam is kind of the baby that they would have spawned. Mike comes out of the gates just smoking. It sort of slows down. There's this sort of middle section that they can't really find their way. Fishman starts dropping a lot of fills and kind of hoping that Trey, Mike, and Paige will sort of connect, so then they can kind of find a crescendo. Right after the first 2 minutes, call it 6.5 to 10 minutes, where they're sort of struggling. Then finally around 9:40, Fishman's just is like, I've had enough, and just drops back to the beat and let's just get on the same page here. And then at the 10-minute section, they do find this cool theme where they're essentially hay jamming. Effectively, like we're in circa 1994 here.
Yeah, all my timestamps are almost identical to yours. And the part that you're talking about now, I said by around 10 minutes or 11 minutes to 12 minutes, we're fully type 2, and they found a perfect balance between solid rock backbone, odd minor key synthesizers, loops, and unpredictability, which you can use to describe 1994 and 1995.
For sure. And I think what's fascinating, and you talk about Phish being like extremely referential, right? And a lot of times that's referential to other artists, vis-a-vis teases and things of that nature. But I think what they've done recently, they've almost started like trolling themselves in a way where they will like play a riff or a melody from a jam from 3 years ago. And in this case, kind of like much like, house or EDM DJs, we find ourselves back into effectively the psychedelic jazz jam from My Friend, My Friend.
Yeah, it's a recurring, if not a recurring melody or a recurring theme, it's a recurring vibe or feeling that keeps
100%.
popping up in this show.
100%. And then after we sort of find ourselves back into that psychedelic jazz vibe, we modulate keys, kind of go into that Allman Brothers motif, but Trey decides to reprise the psychedelic cowboy melody. We are back into a lighter, bouncier version of what we heard from My Friend, My Friend.
Yeah, around like 16 and a half and 18 minutes. Like it becomes a very pleasant melody. And then it turns into what I called bliss on steroids at 19 minutes. And you and I emailed a little bit about this. I thought I compared it a little bit, not directly, but had the same feeling as certain parts of the Tahoe Tweezer from 2013, where Trey was just kind of soloing over this perfect rhythm bed where there's still lots of Easter eggs going on with the other three band members, but Trey's kind of front and center with big sustain. This is very happy Phish right alongside My Friend, My Friend, if not better. And they return to 23 minutes and they kind of power down into Pillow Jets of Sound.
Yeah, this is best band in the world status right here.
Yes, agreed. For Pillow Jets, this is where the 2.0 sort of thing kind of came to me, where I don't really like the song yet. I know I will eventually. It's just kind of this Borg mentality where I fight it, and then there's one version that grabs me, and then I think it's one of their best songs. And that hasn't yet happened to me with Pillow Jets of Sound, but I'm sure we will get there. I imagine it was most people's time to go to the bathroom at the show, right? We're about a half hour into the second set. I did like the synthesizer, like at the 1 minute mark of the song, but the rest of it, eh. And then all of a sudden, like the second they start jamming, it goes into evil, greasy Phish at like 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Not that dissimilar from Split Open and Melt. It was an odd vehicle to get them there, but they got there complete with creepy telephone noises that they've been experimenting with recently, in recent years, I should say. And then I wrote, thank God for Fishman, who keeps this all together before he switches to double time. And we're back to Tahoe Tweezer style fast rock jamming. Like, this is a weird, awesome jam.
This is the best 5 minutes of Phish I've heard in over a decade. To your point, 100%, this is a contemporary split open and melt jam. And the outro jam, the first section of this jam, extremely dissonant and cacophonic.
Yeah.
And then it's juxtaposed to, it's probably more like 4 minutes of the best Phish I've heard in over 10 years. This section that starts around 8:12, the best way I would describe it's maniacal.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds to me like the Marat Chin from 93.
Yeah.
Especially like the dichotomy of that one is like very dissonant, and then they switch gears and that kind of turns into a Weekapog jam. But there's also this part in that jam where Fishman's sort of screaming. In that particular jam, I think it's the most Trey ever sounds like a horn almost. And
his guitar, you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
And in this particular jam, Page, he finds this line that Page starts on the keys. And there's basically like these two melodies that he plays off of. And it felt like the roof was about to blow off.
And it almost does. It almost does.
Yeah.
At around like 13 minutes, I wrote complete mastery. Right around, actually a little earlier on 10:45, and then 13, he drops it back into Tweezer, and the whole band just briefly melts back into it.
Yeah, it's so good. It sounds composed.
Yes, it does.
It sounds like they've been practicing it. And my prediction moving forward is I think you're going to hear this jam again. I think this is something that they will use as the foundation for other jams to sort of lift off. I don't think this is the last we've heard of this.
I hope not. And then they kind of melt back into Tweezer, which is just kind of like a stopover after, in all capital letters, an amazing Pillow Jets jam. It sounds for a second a little bit like they're going to go into Steam. They don't, but there's a little bit, not quite a tease, but a feeling there before they go into Piper, which is an amazing excuse to jam and always has been. It's not exactly a slow Piper intro, but it is close. And as
Yeah.
fast, and they get real fast. It reminded me of 1999, like that version from Oswego that maybe changed my life. As fast
Mm.
as they're playing, they're still melodically taking their time because they're not forcing any specific melody or riff. Like they're still just searching like they do in a lot of jams, but they're just doing it in a really fast tempo. And it's not very directed, but it is very exciting.
Yeah, and this is back-to-back Storm references. So Pillow Jets, we have Conjurers of Thunder, and then we obviously woke last night to the
This
sound of the
sounds of the
storm in
storm.
the air.
Yeah.
So we get our another rain reference. Yeah, this jam's, it's interesting. This jam's really good, and I think in a typical show, or if this Piper jam was played at Mondegreen, I think people would be talking about this Piper even more. I characterize this Piper as like A for effort. Like they really try to go for it. And like you said, they have this really fast beat and tempo going on this. Trey does that, and only like Trey can do. He has that really cool like call recall thing that he does where it's almost as if he's trying to play, mimic two different guitarists playing back and forth
Yes.
with another. And he attempts to do that here. And I think it's really cool. And there's some good execution. I think the more I've actually listened to this jam, I think it's gotten better. So we have this really fast paced part, and then things slow down a bit and get a little bit less melodic, and we kind of get some minor key jamming.
Yeah.
The 8-minute mark that I don't find terribly compelling, but then again, about 4 minutes later, it picks up again. Trey has some really nice lines here and goes big, and then they really go for it again. And Trey's flexing here, and I couldn't help but think at the time he was it was a little bit of a wink and a nod to Jimi Hendrix here, and
Yeah.
perhaps with a little Woodstock shout out here.
That's a good point. Yeah, it now that I think about it, when you mentioned that, it does kind of have that feel of like very muddy, but you could still, tell distinctly what's happening. And I thought that by 11 minutes, that chaotic part you're talking about, that it's either great or terrible, depending on what you took at set break.
Yeah, it's kind of like sloppy but good, and I think when you look at it through the lens of an homage towards Jimmy, I think it sounds better.
Yeah, it works. I agree. That's a nice lens to look at it through. But after that insane end to a Piper, they play a few more riffs of Tweezer. It's just kind of a stopover before they find a landing spot and shine a light. Like I know looking back that it's not closing the set, but it sure sounds like it could. Like it carries that perfect classic rock / Exile on Main Street sing-along feel at Bethel of all places, right? I know the Rolling Stones didn't play, but that idea of like everyone being in it together and singing along together has that feeling of what Woodstock has been marketed as, that kind of communal feeling where everything coalesced at a specific point in time.
Well, and it made sense to play it on this particular night because this song is seemingly about a junkie that's dying, right?
Yeah.
Verse 2, could not seem to get a high on you. Excuse me, verse 1, saw you stretched out in room 1009 with a smile on your face and a tear right in your eye. Oh, I couldn't seem to get a line on you. Our second reference of lines here. You go back to verse 3, when you're drunk in the alley, baby, with your clothes all torn. And then verse 4, angels beating all their wings in time with smiles on their faces and a gleam right in their eyes. Whoa, I thought I Heard one sigh for you. Come on up now. Come on up now. Come on up now. So now I think we're back into what we were hearing a lot of towards the second half of the first set. This seems to be another allusion to what's going on with Trey and maybe where he could have been. It was interesting too. During the show, it sounded to me when he sang My Sweet Honey Love, he actually, it sounded to me like he got choked up.
I wonder if, like you have mentioned a few times, that the geography of literally where this is in New York, because we know that when he plays or when they play at SPAC, that it's a big like homecoming, that he feels very connected. And Bethel Woods is about an hour from Saratoga, a little more. So it's, not that far off, like you mentioned. So I wonder if it really hits him that hard emotionally, if he's so conscious of it.
Yeah. It's a great song and I think perfectly placed. And given the context of how I was seeing this show, I think it makes perfect sense to hear this one.
I agree. And I thought that it was done. I mean, when I say done, I mean the set. I thought that it was over because Shine a Light is the new Loving Cup. It's like the perfect version of, the perfect song to close a set. But no, they played Chalk This Torture, which I'm surprised they played this. Like, it's not a shock, but Shine a Light could have ended us on such a different note. And Chalk This has been such a jam vehicle in recent years that it's kind of odd to tag it on as an extra song for the set. It's a cool jam. It's got offbeat rhythms. And then there's the odd synth heavy tone. And I don't know, it's just low key and casual for Chalk Dust, at least. And then is it pronounced by a Yankee Doodle tease? Do you hear that?
Yeah, it's 7:25.
Yeah.
You get the Yankee Doodle.
So is this just for shits and giggles, you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this show is littered with references throughout. So it doesn't surprise me at all. And I think what's fascinating about this jam, and to me, this is the silver medalist or bronze medalist for best jam of the night. There is no outro solo. We're at 3:19. We drop into a minor jam that Mike finds this really cool theme that Trey jumps on. And I know you've talked about Tahoe Tweezer a few times. This jam, to me, they're going so fast. It sounds like they are going to do a start and stop and do the woo. And thank God they don't. But
yeah, I agree.
The tempo picks up, and I mean, Trey just unleashes a searing solo. This is, again, best band in the world status right here.
Yeah, at 9.5 minutes, I wrote, welcome back, Machine Gun Trey. Really otherworldly stuff. And so the set closes, they go off, come back on, and the encore is a hell of a trio from completely different eras of the band. This is the band's Eras tour, encore at least. Big black furry creatures from Mars, which is always fun. Gotta Jaboo, and then more. So you have this craziness, which is very typical of Phish, right? Very trademark, or at least very characteristic of their goofy weirdness, like their Mike side, I guess I could say. Got a Jaboo, 1999, rhythm based, not quite funk, but like repetitive, bass heavy jam. And then more 3.0, Church of Trey, uplifting, kind of shine a light in different words. So you get everything in 3 songs.
Yeah, you always know Phish is feeling themselves, and you could tell they knew that they were on tonight. And in fact, I predicted we were going to get a Nicholas,
Oh,
which,
wow. Oh, wow. What a call.
right, which is, I mean, it's Big Black Furry from Mars is effectively an iteration off of that, right?
Yeah.
So cool. And I don't know if I've actually ever seen Big Black Furry Creature before. So that was cool. And really nice laid back Jaboo with some great fireworks at the end. And you have more with water and rain references, going back to this Trey motif of working shit out and this almost being therapeutic for him. You have my heart is screaming because half of what I say is lies, and it takes so much to keep up this disguise. The memory's still so real. The memory's still so real. I guess it's really never over, even when it's over. And then it's, all about vibrating with love and light. That's the solution to getting through your shit.
I got to tell you, Jeffrey, and I sincerely mean this as a compliment. It's easier to take the lyrics for songs like More seriously when I hear them spoken by you than when I first hear them sang by Trey, because it's kind of cheesy linked to those melodies. But when it's read in kind of a spoken word way, you just take the words at face value.
Totally. And if I may, as you can imagine, after the show, I was very excited with kind of this hypothesis and theory with respect to, I think, what was kind of going on beneath the surface with this show. And as the days went on, I started to question my attendance bias. I was like, maybe it was the drugs. I was projecting my own shit onto what was going on here, right?
Which is what we do that, though. We do that.
100%. Everybody, people are doing that all the time. So I ended up deciding to go to Mondegreen, right? I decided to go Saturday, and I'm there with my friend pre-show, and we're at, I forget the name of the area that it was where like the performance art was going on. Right when you're walking in, right to the left, when you were coming through the entrance, there was a guy that was getting like cotton candy blown on him.
Oh, the surrealist.
Yeah, the surrealist. I mean, that was the coolest. That was
that was.
Scene. So, anyways, I'm hanging out with my friend, and I see two guys and a girl, like talking like deep Phish musicology and like analyzing this summer tour. So I jump over and interject myself into the conversation to tell them how great I thought the Bethel show was. We're talking deep Phish here, Brian. We're getting deep. Chat for 5-10 minutes. I say my goodbyes. We're going to head towards the show. And as I'm walking away, I notice that they all have the one show at a time sticker on their shirts. And I'm walking away and I think to myself, oh my God, I have to tell them about this experience that I had at Bethel. So I run back, interrupt them for the second time, and I tell them all the things. And the woman looks at me and she says, it's really interesting that you say that. Trey hosted a woman in her family who was dealing with loss due to substance abuse. And she had posted and was effusive about how great Trey was. He spent like an hour with her before the show and the people she was there with. And all of a sudden, when you look at it from that perspective, needless to say, I was through the roof. She was telling me other details. I kind of forgot what she was even talking. Right. I wasn't paying attention because I could not believe it. It felt like I was being validated here. It's interesting. We go back to that like lullaby-like melody from the No Man's and No Man's Lands. As going through the show and listening to it a couple times over, I couldn't place that, and it felt like a tease to me. And it sounded like Trey was sort of playing, the lyrics to a chorus of another song. Trey's like the most lyrical guitarist of all time, right? And it occurs to me that It's actually the theme to the Mary Tyler Moore Show.
Which he's teased in the past.
Is that right?
Yes.
Let's read the lyrics to this. And he's doing the part, you're going to make it after all.
Right.
The
right.
lyrics of this song are, how will you make it on your own? The world is awfully big, girl. This time you're all alone. But it's time you started living. It's time you let someone else do some giving. Love is all around. No need to waste it. You can have a town. Why don't you take it? You're going to make it after all. It seems to me this show was a tribute to her. And it's really powerful stuff. I think ultimately, and I don't even know if Trey's doing it overtly. Like, a lot of this stuff can probably be on a subconscious level. He talks about playing, he's like merely a vessel, and he's just sort of, he's just playing what comes out from the ether. I don't know if that validates what happened or what I thought was going on at that show. Kind of feels like maybe it does, but it doesn't even really matter. It's
well,
not
that's
even
the bottom line. It makes for a good story, but right, we're back at bug. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
It feels good, and you could choose to believe it and not harm anyone or anything. And that's what's so great about this.
I've been thinking about this for a while. Like, if the members of Phish weren't musicians, like, what would they do for a living? And I've always thought they would be like physicists or like theoretical physicists. I mean, the music already is like super spacey, and when they're like in some deep jamming, like, it almost sounds like cellular, like, right?
Yeah. They're explorers of a thought, of a sort.
Right. And physics and quantum mechanics is a way to explain the whole universe. And one part of the fundamentals of quantum mechanics is electrons and photons. They act as a wave, right? And the double slit experiment proved that once there's an observer, it turns into a particle in a place in space and time. It shapeshifts. It takes on a whole new meaning depending on the observer. And I think when you look at a Phish show and the contextual relevance that's kind of the world, their ethos, from my perspective, it's very similar. A particular song, depending on setting and scene, takes on a whole new meaning based on who's singing it and experiencing it firsthand. And I think we're just super lucky to have a band like Phish out in the world, and super, super grateful to have been at this show and to have the experience that I did. And thank you so much for having me on the pod.
Well, Jeff, I can't thank you enough, because I love going through Phish shows, and I love hearing shows that I have not heard before, or re-listening to shows I have heard before. But when someone comes with, I won't even call it a story or an agenda, a perspective is the word I'm looking for. When someone comes with a perspective that helps me listen to a specific song, like Julius, for example, that I've listened to Lord knows how many times and for however many decades, and I could listen to it a different way now. Like, what a gift you've just given me, in addition to our listeners who, whether or not they buy into that part and they just like this show or this episode, thank you for coming on and sharing your thoughts. It's been a real pleasure, and I can't thank you enough.
Well, it's my pleasure. It is a podcast, so it's supposed to be entertaining, and we're supposed to throw shit on the wall. So thanks again for having me. Super fun to be on the show, and we'll see you soon.
And that's it for today's conversation with Jeffrey Rosenberg. We got almost everything right, but there were a few things that need to be corrected.
Attendance bias fact check.
During the lightning round, and soon thereafter, Jeffrey name-checks many shows that have been covered on attendance bias in past episodes. A small sample includes July 10th, 1999 at Camden with guest Adam Rosenberg, June 28th, 2000 in Hartford with Hal Hansen, December 11th, 1999 in Philadelphia with Joseph Rosenberg, July 4th, 2000 in Camden with Will Little, and August 17th, 2024 at Mondegreen with Seamus Gallivan. Also, the Halloween run where they dropped the Mercury was the first ever episode of Attendance Bias, November 2nd, 2018 in Las Vegas with Elisa Alashant. So not bad. One podcast, 3 Rosenbergs. Jeffrey references our common friend James Dell, who was on Attendance Bias, his episode airing September 4th, 2024, where he discussed the sci-fi soldier set from Halloween 2021. If you enjoyed today's episode going down lots of theoretical rabbit holes, then I highly recommend you give James's episode a listen as well. While setting the scene and context for today's show, it's mentioned by both Jeffrey and myself that Bethel is not terribly far from where Trey was arrested in 2006. Trey was arrested in Whitehall, New York, which is approximately 218 miles from Bethel, about a 3.5-hour drive, so not terribly far, but also not terribly close. And finally, the theme from the Mary Tyler Moore Show has been teased 3 times according to Phish.net, although I'm sure that I've heard it many more times than that. Regardless, the 3 teases listed on Phish.net are New Year's Eve 2023 during Tube, August 4th, 2024 at Deer Creek during Run Like an Antelope, and August 6th, 2024 at Van Andel Arena during Sigma Oasis. And that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Jeffrey Rosenberg for joining me today, Phish.net for its help with the fact check, the Mockingbird Foundation for everything they do to help music education for children, and Phish.in for the outstanding recording used in today's episode. If you enjoy Attendance Bias, please support the show. You could leave a rating and a review of it on your favorite podcast app. You could also follow Attendance Bias on social media, mostly Instagram and Twitter. Finally, you can visit www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias and donate anything you can to help keep the costs down of production. Thank you again so much for listening, and I'll see you next time on Attendance Bias.